This is Gail Morgan welcoming you to the Libertarian Counterpoint. Now, your host, James Just.
And good morning, or for those of you watching this live, good evening for those of you who are catching us on public access. Gentlemen, the Supreme Court has issued a ruling that we have all kind of are happy about, even though we're probably happier than we should be. It limits the power of police to enter your home and do a search under the caretaking standard.
Doctrine, yes.
Yeah. It was, for me, the best thing about this was it was a 9-0 ruling, that it was a universal ruling. That was the best sign. But I don't think it goes as far as a lot of us think. John, what do you think about that one?
Well, yeah, the caretaking thing is kind of scary because it allows police especially to make a judgment about when other people are a danger to themselves or others, and then act accordingly. But in this particular case that we did the research on, or that somebody was kind enough to do the research on, cops were called to a guy's home, and he was 70, I think, and he owned a gun, and he was licensed and registered and everything. And he asked his wife, he was having some issues, and he asked his wife to shoot him. And he was later taken away, and then the cops decided, well, this guy doesn't need a gun in his house. Well, at no time did he threaten anybody else. He didn't have any arrests, any convictions, anything else. And they just decided, oh, well, we're just going to take his gun. So, that kind of broad interpretation of police power, and the idea there is a caretaking act. I understand, or a caretaking doctrine. I understand, the idea that sometimes people are going to do harm to themselves, and a good Samaritan would do something to help them not do harm to themselves. That's the whole idea of it. But the idea that police can decide that is pretty frightening to me. And really what this thing says is that you just can't use an excuse to go in and take somebody's guns. And
it was a Fourth Amendment case. It was a search and seizure without a warrant. That was what the case turned on, and that's pretty clear. They didn't have a warrant. It was a domestic argument between the husband and his wife, and the wife called the cops on him, and so they decided to take his gun. No warrant, no nothing. Just, hey, you got the gun, we'll take it. So I mean, it was kind of a no-brainer as far as the Supreme Court was concerned, simply on Fourth Amendment grounds. This was not a Second Amendment case.
Yeah. Well, no, I wasn't. I kind of wandered around it. I can't say it's early for me because we're doing this show. I've been up 4 hours, so I have no excuse. But the idea that unreasonable search and seizure has been going on. I watch a lot of cop shows and read a lot of mysteries and all the rest of that, and in them, I would think that it's some kind of plot to condition the populace through popular media that it's okay for cops to do whatever they need to do to close the case. Well, we have rights for a reason, and the founding persons were being politically correct here.
You're following the Google guidelines as far as gender.
I have when we talk about that, I have a personal example. So I think it anything that cuts down on the Gestapo's ability to kick your door in and take your stuff is a wonderful thing. And this spelled out pretty clearly, no, you can't even use the caretaking doctrine to take people's stuff. So the idea that you can just use no reason whatsoever to take their stuff should logically follow. But since we know that the powers that be are very specific in their ignoring court rulings and logic, I don't think it's going to do much. But I like the idea that they overturned the circuit court and said, no, you need a search warrant to go into somebody's home. You just can't decide after the fact that this person's going to present a danger and go take their stuff, whether it's they're potted plants, or they're Babe Ruth autographed baseball bat or a gun. So I think it's great in a way, but doesn't go far enough. I agree with you, James. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a strange business that we live in. We're dealing with these, and I've lost my train of thought. So we'll just go ahead and move on. Google has decided that they're going to help you self-censor. They've decided that they're going to suggest inclusive terms. You say inclusive terms as you are writing out your Google emails and your Google Docs and all this various stuff. They are going to, how they do this Google suggestions as you misspell words and whatnot. They're going to.
Yeah, it's not. This is not really new. Google has been doctoring searches for years now. If you put in I think John, your favorite example is if you put in Hillary Clinton it'll come up with a lot of benign things as opposed to some of the more not so benign things, simply because that's the way they've got the algorithm rigged. And now they're saying that if you put in a gender-specific pronoun, he or she, it'll change it to they or you, or it'll change it in a way to make it non-gender specific in order to be, I guess, more politically correct. Now, I have a problem with political correctness. I mean, to me,
I'm shocked by that, Richard.
Political correctness is simply a way of nudging people into believing what the politically correct crowd would have you believe. And the politically correct crowd usually believes in a lot of nonsense. So whenever somebody tells me to be politically correct, I want to check what their underlying motive is. And I would want to check what Google's underlying motive is. In this case, and I suspect Google's underlying motive is to stay on the right side of the woke crowd, to stay on the right side of the politically correct Karens out there. And and their ultimate rationale is to avoid more regulation by an administration and a bureaucracy that is controlled by Karens.
I have an example from another. I don't want to mention. Well, you mentioned Google, and that's a commercial enterprise. I don't. Anyway, the most widely known grammar checking program that's out there that tons and tons of people use, and I have the quote unquote professional version because I are a writer, and when you're writing for effect, a good writer will ponder over and really burn some emotional energy picking the right word, like as or during, while. I mean, you can sit and spend 10 minutes choosing that. And I ran a novel that I've finished finally, which Richard's already read, through this checker. And the phrase was, a lot of blokes who man the walls go to this bar. And the grammar checking device suggested that manning the walls might cause some people to be upset because it was gender specific. And I looked at that sentence and thought, well, first of all, if you want to get published, you got to watch word count. I could have rewritten the sentence and made it much worse and had it be non-gender specific. But if I did that, I would have got the suggestion that was a bad sentence. So, quite frankly, in every prison environment, the people who are manning the walls, in most cases, are men. So it is factually correct as well. So the links people go to try not to hurt feelings is ridiculous, first of all, and counterproductive second. And the example that I used, Richard, was I put into Google, since we're beating on Google here, Hillary Clinton LI, Hillary Clinton space LI. And the search that came back, and nowhere on the first 2 pages was anything related to liar, lying, lies, all the rest of that. What came up first was library. Hillary Clinton library. So I'm willing to bet that the number of people who were out there searching for Hillary Clinton and library, that was their goal, was probably 0.1 or 0.01% of the people who were searching for Hillary Clinton, first letter L, second letter I. So that's pretty specific algorithm tweaking. And when I looked on I used other search devices. My favorite, give a commercial plug, but I don't own any stock. I don't even think it's public. If it's public, Google would have bought it because they're a great competitor. DuckDuckGo. And they don't tweak their algorithms for political purpose. And so most of my searches now are going through that search term. And it's everywhere. I sat down in a coffee house during the height of the lockdown last summer, across from a woman who had a doctorate in psychology, and she was being paid a very, very good wage to make sure that the documents, and I can't mention the company, and the communications of this company were politically correct. She was going through their advertising material. She was going through their website. She was going through everything and being paid a heck of a wage. She didn't tell me what it was, but I figured it out in conversation. I used to be a stockbroker, so I'm really good at figuring out how much money people make. So this is pervasive. It's everywhere, and it's disgusting. And I've gone on and
Well,
on.
I wouldn't take it as far as saying it's disgusting. I would say that it's, there's nothing wrong with using pronouns or using words that are not gender specific, as long as it doesn't junk up the prose. And most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it's just fine to say, use a non-gender specific pronoun, or at least in many cases. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with making sure that our culture is treats women equally to men, treats gays and trans, etc., equally to straights. All of those examples. Those are all noble ends, as far as I'm concerned. But that's just me. Other people may have a different viewpoint on that.
Well, when I say disgusting, I love Richard correcting me on the show. It's good. No, it's a good thing. It's a good thing, and I'm completely open to it. Can you just kill his feet for a while, James? No, I'm kidding. When I say it's disgusting, as a writer, I should use a better word. As long as people are aware of what's going on, made aware of what's going on, I'm much more comfortable with it. And as a commercial enterprise, people can do whatever they want, which is why you're finding chinks in Google's armor, because more and more people are being, and if they're politically on the far right, they are disgusted by it, and they can make that choice to use a different vendor. But I just wish people were a little smarter, but then we wouldn't have anything to talk about on the show.
Well, you control language, you control thought, and that's kind of my feeling on that whole thing.
Yeah.
ACLU has issued a statement saying say no to a cashless future. You're saying going to a cashless future is a danger, is for personal privacy, and it's a governmental danger. So the ACLU is now starting to realize that this digital currency, completely being on digital online is a long-term danger, not because of corporations tracking you, but because, hey, the government can track you. They're finally starting to realize this.
I'm just amazed and gratified whenever the far left, ACLU, and the far right get together and agree on something. And this is a case where the paranoids and the conspiracy theorists on the far right and those on the far left are saying no to the same thing, which is the subject that we're talking about. I love to see it.
And I think that what in this case, and this is where you're in politics, James, actively, and I am not. Their objection to a cashless society comes from two completely different directions. on the ACLU side is concerned a little bit with right to privacy and all the rest of that, but the major bug in their bonnet was about people of color being more affected and poor people being more affected by the financial impact of having to go to a cashless society. And because something like 50% of the black population is underbanked or underserved by banking, and something like 60% of the Hispanic society. And so every time you use, people who are on the edge financially, 5% can make a big difference. 4% can make a big difference. And every time you use a card, there's a fee involved. You might not see it, but those costs are passed on to the person using the card in one way or another. And so if you don't have a bank account, let's say you've had your wages garnished, you don't have proper documentation or anything, you're forced to go buy some kind of prepaid card to use and carry it around with you, and the fees on those are outrageous, and then you'll end up with a balance on it and that you can't use, and on and on and on. And they're upset about the fact that everything you do is tracked. So that if we're looking at politics in the future and trying to get people to be more liberty-based thinking, we need to look at how to pitch the problems that we understand as libertarians to both sides. And it could be for two different reasons, because the ACLU's big drive in this was that it affected people of color, and I think primarily and secondarily was the violation of civil liberties, whereas the people on the right it's the having the deep state know everything they do. So in this case, they came together, and I think it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it's for those of us here down in the lower ends of the economic strata, a lot of work gets done cashless under the table, because it's not worth it to hire somebody to come in for an hour to clean your garage, or to clean your driveway, or whatever. And so you pay them give them a $20 bill, and you come over and you spend an hour and you clean your driveway. No one's going to report that. And a lot of that economic activity happens quietly under the table, and it's nobody else's business.
Well, it's the IRS's business. At least they'll tell you so.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the ultimate reason why the government is trying to push in the direction of a cashless society. They want to make sure that every nickel that's ever earned by anybody, handyman, neighbor doing a favor for a neighbor, whatever, doesn't escape the dragnet of federal taxation.
Well, and there's. Go ahead, James. I'm sorry.
Well, I was changing topics. Go ahead and finish.
Yeah. Well, so they give you an example of what people are forced to become liars and criminals by regulations that are supposed to be there to protect them. Your example. In the state of California, you have this wonderful thing called the Contractor State License Board that constantly runs stings to arrest unlicensed contractors. So if you're supposed to have a licensed contractor put a water heater in your house, but the problem is that a licensed contractor to pull a permit wants a job to be a couple $1,000s or more. And most jobs that people need done in their home, many of them, especially poor people, like small plumbing jobs, which a licensed plumber is supposed to do, are a couple $100 jobs. But a lot of them are somewhere between $400 and a couple $1,000s. And that's where they become illegal, because people will hire a handyman to do these things, and they'll pay him cash. And so they've made the handyman is then a criminal. The poor widow who needs her plumbing fixed so she has water to bathe and cook with and all the rest of that becomes a criminal. And the regulation forces people to become criminals, and not just the idea that they want to keep track of cash. And what, Richard, I don't, or James, do either one of you know off the top of your head the number for the percentage of the GDP that's actually unstated because it's underground economy?
I have no clue.
Is it? I think the
It's large. I don't know what. I don't.
Stated numbers stated numbers 15%, and I would hazard a guess that it's probably closer to 30%. So people are doing more with cash, not less.
Yeah,
And the
well,
idea that a business can turn you away when you're going in and trying to buy food because you don't have a card. Now, I agree. Private business can do whatever they want. They can say, pay me in Bitcoin. And if you don't want to do business with them, then have Bitcoin. But it really affects the poor much greater than the rich on a financial hardship basis, and exposes people of wealth to the IRS, as Richard said. So there's evils on all sides.
yeah, well, if you have a drain pipe, from your sink, just a little short little piece of pipe, that needs to be replaced because it's 50 years old, and you have to call a plumbing company to come fix it, it's going to cost a freaking fortune. So you end up either fixing it yourself at substandard quality, or you hire someone who knows what they're doing under the table. This whole thing is goofy. And talk about earning our nickels, though. Inflation has arrived in force, and grocery prices are going up, and people are buying stocks on margin again because, of course, they are. Have we not learned anything from the past, Richard?
Well, the Fed says no inflation, nothing to see here. That any inflation you're seeing is transitory. By the fable they're trying to spin is that because the economy was shut down a year ago, and we're seeing price increases from a year ago, that those will go away once the economy gains steam and the supply comes back up. The problem with that is 1/3 of the money supply that's ever been created in the history of the United States, or at least since the Federal Reserve Board was created in 1913. 1/3 of the money ever created was created in the last 18 months or something like that, since the pandemic, and a higher percentage since 2008. And at the same time, the supply of goods and services, due to the lockdowns, went way down a year ago. So you've got two things making inflation happen. One, a lack of supply, and two, a huge increase in demand given the increase in the amount of cash out there, money sloshing around in the economy. So to say that inflation is transitory is totally bogus. Inflation depends on two different things. One, it depends on the money supply related to the goods and services available for sale. And the second thing it depends upon, or that it causes inflation, is sentiment. In other words, people being afraid of inflation. And the more people are afraid of inflation, the more apt they are to say, let me spend these soon to be worthless dollars on real stuff before they are worth less. And that's the psychological factor that starts inflation going even faster. And that's happening now. We're seeing it particularly in real estate. People are borrowing because the interest rate is way low. They can afford to borrow huge amounts of money. A house in California, which cost $80,000 30 years ago, is now selling for $1 million. And it's the same house. It's the dollar that's worth less. That's inflation. And inflation hits the economy in three stages. The first stage is raw materials, and we're seeing the price of steel, the price of wood has tripled. The price of copper, I think, has doubled.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the price of corn, foodstuffs has doubled. So you're looking at a huge increase in the cost of raw goods, raw materials. When manufacturers buy the raw materials, at some point they have to say, I have to raise my prices or I'm going to lose money on every sale. And making more sales at a loss is not going to help me very much. So they start raising their prices, and at that point you see wholesale prices go up. And once the grocery store sees their wholesale price goes up, or the hardware store, or the retail establishment of whatever kind, they're going to maintain their margins as well and raise their prices. And that's when it actually starts to hit the consumer in the pocketbook where it hurts. And we're seeing it right now, in particular in food prices, which have gone up dramatically in the last little while. Food prices and housing prices. It's going to continue because because of the misbegotten policies of the federal government. They're still paying out unemployment bonuses. There's extra unemployment insurance. They're still talking about more lockdown payouts. And to the extent that people are saying, I don't think I'll get that job at McDonald's or at being a clerk at Walmart or whatever it is. I think I'll just stay home and make more money doing nothing, which is a totally rational thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
But the money, the unemployment money keeps coming, and so that's what people do. So the supply is not keeping up with the demand. So that's another reason why the inflation that we're seeing is not going to be transitory.
Well, I want to point out this whole job shortage thing is a bit of a fallacy, because the bad jobs, the McDonald's jobs are going to be the last jobs to get filled, because the people are going to try to get the better jobs first. You're not going to take a job at McDonald's as long as theoretically the job at the Target warehouse is still hiring. You're just not going to do it. And so the worst jobs are going to be the last jobs to get filled. And so if you've got a burger flipper job with a bad boss, you are not going to have a good time finding an employee for a while. Because if you're an employee, why would you work for them when you've got hundreds of other places out hiring? And so those low-end jobs are just going to have a hard time, because the money doesn't plan out. You only get half of your income plus $1,200. So it doesn't work out unless you're a part-time worker.
Well, and the other thing that's going on is you mentioned margin accounts, people borrowing on margin to buy stocks. For the last, I think, 2 decades or so, we have seen a dramatic increase in the money supply, but no inflation. Why is that? Two reasons. One, we're seeing technological improvements, which is a deflationary force. If a piece of equipment, if your iPhone does more than your flip phone did and costs the same, that's a deflationary force. So deflation in that sense has worked against inflation. But the other thing that's gone on is we haven't seen inflation, but we've seen inflation not measured by the consumer price index or the other cost of living indexes. We're seeing asset inflation. We're seeing the inflation in the price of stocks, inflation in the price of real estate, inflation in the price of commodities, inflation in the price of like gold, value holding commodities, and inflation in cryptocurrencies. So the inflation has been with us all along. It's just not officially measured.
Yeah, well, inflation in the housing market has been insane. Just in my neighborhood, inflation in the housing market is insane. The price of my house is absolutely ridiculous. If I wanted to sell it, I live in the edge of the ghetto, right across the street from the UC Davis Med Center. I have to deal with helicopters and all kinds of noise. And yet the house just down the street from me sold for $600,000 and something. It's absolutely flipping ridiculous. And it's only going to get worse because of things like Aggie Square. And we are out of time. Thank you guys for watching this. Please catch us next week. And from all of us here at Team Counterpoint, please remember to love everybody.
Thanks so much, James.